Hi everyone, it's Saria here. Good to see you. I am here with my friend Vanya, and Vanya runs a business, Peaceful Eating, Facebook page, and I'll put the link down in the comments on her page and website. She has gone through such a journey around her weight and delved into it by going into training in well, Vanya, I'm going to let you tell the story because otherwise I might get it wrong and I don't want to get it wrong. So, Vanya,
Okay.
I'd love to hear
Yeah.
more about your journey,
Mhm.
what your childhood was like and your relationship to weight, and then how this evolved into you now devoting your life to
Mm.
helping people shift their relationship to with food and their
Mhm.
body.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be with your group of people. It really is an honor. So thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure.
So where did it start for me? I grew up in a family of well, my parents, mum and dad, happily married, but it was my mum's second marriage. So I had an older brother and sister from my mother's first rather traumatic marriage. And um, my parents had two more kids. And so we grew up, four of us in the household together in South Africa. And from my really earliest memories, I remember my mum and my sister being on diets. My sister's 8 years older than me, so you can just imagine. By the time I was 8, she was already 16, and I remember um, my mum and my sister having these charts up on the bathroom wall of, their kind of ideal weights and what their weight
Yeah.
was that day. And they had these kind of the trajectory of weight loss they were going to be, hopefully for them, hopefully creating for themselves. And then what was the actual reality day by day sort of thing. And this is just, I just thought this was a normal thing because that's what
Wow.
I witnessed growing up, and
Mm,
so I would also stand on the scale and, you know, I had no understanding about what anything meant, but to me, it must have meant it was too much because, my mom and my sister, I really kind of idolized them. They're both highly capable, intelligent, conventionally attractive people, women. And, it was just like, this is what women do, or this is what it is to be a woman. This is what we do. And I remember, just from very young, this idea that this food was for the boys. My dad was included in the boy category, and this is for us girls. And this idea of restraint, this idea that women needed to restrain what they were eating, that having certain things was off limits for women or girls. Well, not really girls. I was never told directly that should be off limits to me. But my earliest memory of that was probably, I don't know, I must have probably been around 10 or maybe 11 when we were having, I don't know what, some kind of Sunday lunch roast dinner thing. My mum's a really great cook and was, and there was something, I don't know. And I remember having peas, which I really liked, and gravy on the peas. And I remember my dad saying to me, you probably shouldn't have so much gravy. It's quite fattening. And my dad, I mean, you've met my parents, I think. Both of them are, very warm, loving, kind people. And I want to say, but, and my dad, for one, has always been quite fat phobic, which is quite ironic given my mother is fat. Um, and has been for quite a long time now. But I remember things like, we'd be watching Miss World or something on TV, and my dad would go, "Oh, she's got legs up to her armpits," that kind of, just really declaring his preference for a certain body type. And so I just internalize all of this, sort of quietly internalizing all of this and then witnessing what I see. My mother and my sister always in this kind of weight control paradigm, really. That was where they lived, in a sort of different world to the boys. And so I started to kind of restrict or think about that from very, very early age. And then when I was about 13 and I went to high school, I had orthodontic treatment, and I had a very narrow palate. And the way they were going to fix this, because I have a little bit of a lisp now, but I had a much stronger lisp then. The way they were going to fix my lisp was to widen my palate, and I had this contraption in my mouth that was fixed to my teeth, and it had a little key in it. Oh, it was a bit gruesome, and I had to wind it up every night, and they could hear the crack at night. Anyway, this thing got infected, or I got infected in the roof of my mouth, and I got so desperately ill. Um, and I lost a load of weight. I mean, I wasn't in a particularly big body at the time, but I lost a load of weight because I could barely eat and I had swollen glands and I was really sick. And eventually it got taken out, and I was getting all this approval from people about how much weight I lost. Oh my gosh, you've lost so much weight. You've got so thin, as if it's a good thing, not the fact that I'd missed 3 weeks of school and I was really ill. It's like override all of that. And
No
just,
compassion for what your experience was.
no compassion for my experience, but also the harm of congratulating me on a body that only came about because of severe restriction, because I was severely ill. And that then set me up for, I mean, I think it was probably inevitable, but that really did set me up for this real restriction that I would then enforce upon myself, because I couldn't maintain that very thin body naturally, because that's not my body type. And just sort of set me on this thing of starving myself for weeks at a time. And then I would go on these massive binges. And then my sister's diet would kind of fail, as it inevitably does. And then she would, we would kind of both go on these massive binges. And so the dieting and the binging, and I would, I'm not anymore, but I used to be somebody who was very black and white about things. And so I would like eat nothing for days and days in a row and then just go on these binges. And so it would sort of swing like this. And that went on for quite a long time until I became bulimic. And, at the time, okay, this is South Africa, the early 80s or mid 80s by then, sort of 83 actually. And, this idea of eating disorders was not something we really knew very much about other than anorexia. But bulimia was not something that I knew anything about. So this was actually, in my mind, a kind of good solution to eating too much, And so I did that for a couple of years until I just became very, very depressed and quite withdrawn and didn't want to engage, was very isolating myself. And I was now in my final year at school and just so disengaged, and was really just not doing at all well at school, couldn't study. And we had a visitor at school, those sort of careers advice people. And one of these guys was a psychologist who happened to say the word bulimia. And all my friends are looking at me and I'm just going, oh my gosh, this is an eating disorder. I had no idea. So I went home and I said to my parents, my mother, can you please make me an appointment to see this psychologist, this
Wow.
person?
Wow.
And so I
Wow.
went to this guy, and boy, it took me a long time to have the courage to name what I needed to say. It took weeks and weeks and weeks. I would just kind of sit there frozen because the shame was just huge. And eventually he just said to me, look, you're kind of wasting our time and your parents' money. And, it's like, what do you want to say? And so eventually I managed to spit it out. And you know what? I mean, I don't know what you think of this as a therapist, but literally that day when my mother picked me up, he called her in and he told her, because he said, this is my duty of care. This is a dangerous, life-threatening condition. And I have to tell your parents. But there was like no preparation for me as the person to kind of
Yeah.
be able to process any of that. So, I was just, you can just imagine the shame. And so then my mother came in and I couldn't look
How
at
old were
her.
you?
I was 17.
Wow.
And I just said to her, look, I'll stop the behaviors if you don't tell dad, because the thought of him knowing was just, I couldn't bear, I just thought I'd be such a disappointment and I felt so ashamed. And so she said, okay. And you know what? We never talked about it again.
Wow.
I never went back to that psychotherapist.
Wow.
And my memory is very hazy about what happened next, but
Mm,
I
mm,
stopped the behavior.
yeah.
But I continued with everything other than the purging, you know?
Okay.
And so I would over exercise. I kind of purge in other ways, over
Yeah.
exercise, or I would just starve myself, sort of kept on going from binging to starving, that kind of thing. And so this kind of carried on for a really long time. And, if I wasn't doing that, I was just dieting, but always these really extreme diets. And then there would be periods of binging, and I would kind of lose 20 kilos, put on 20 kilos or 30, whatever, just
Wow.
sort of this yo-yoing kind of thing that would go on, and got married and had children and still this went on. And sugar was the enemy, and I thought I was addicted to food, and I went to OA, Overeaters Anonymous, for those who
Okay.
don't know, as a 12-step program, and that didn't help me. And eventually, thank God, my very, very best friend, who we were at school with, at school together. We'd both been on and off diets together. And, I haven't told you half the story, but anyway, um, she phoned me up. I was now living in the UK, and she phoned me up and she said, like, what diet are you doing? I'm desperate to lose weight. And I just said to her, just don't do it, because why are we doing this to ourselves? It's like, I've just been on this restrictive diet. I've lost 30 kilos and I'm already regaining it all. I mean, it's just like, this is craziness. Why are we doing this to ourselves? And thankfully, she listened to that and she went
Wow.
away and she read other books and researched things. And then she came back to me 6 months later and she said, read this, read that, read the other thing. There's a solution to our problem here. And so I did. And that's how I got into intuitive eating and mindful eating. And, instead of this kind of black and white thing, it's just like the middle path. Um, and so, yeah, that's where my healing really began from all of this. But through,
Amazing.
what I really learned was that trying to control weight is the the biggest problem. We think that that will solve the problem, but
Yeah.
actually it is the problem, not for everybody, because there are people, and probably a lot of people in your community might identify with this, who've had early childhood trauma and have used food as a way to dissociate from the feelings, or the
Hmm.
food is the only kind of stable thing in their lives that they can rely on as a way to try and process and mediate for themselves their own emotional feelings and things. And I'm not talking about that group of people particularly. But what we must remember is, whatever your experience, however it started, almost certainly, I can't say for every single person, of course I can't, but I would say I could be almost certain that on top of that is then shame about being fat or being bigger, then attempts to try and control that later in life by dieting, by restricting certain foods, etc., etc. So there's an overlay of what we call diet culture, which is all these rules about what, when, and how much we should eat and how we should all be controlling our bodies, and all the fear mongering that we have around body size. That is layered on top of the original reason for maybe using food as a way to cope with adverse experiences or trauma. Um, so yeah, I mean that's kind of
Amazing.
my story
That's incredible. And for
briefly.
those of you who are listening, whether you're listening now or later, I want you to pause and think. What were the messages that you got
Mm,
growing up around your weight, around what you had to look like from
mm,
your family, from the media? What were you told that you had to, what, like Vanya shared, of digesting? this programming that ladies with legs up to their armpits were the ones that were attractive. What was the
mm,
imprint that you received? It's really important as when you're speaking to have a think. How am I like that? Or
mm,
what happened in my life to feed the unconscious programming that governs your relationship to food, to your diet, to your body, to your
mm,
weight? What were the messages that you got?
mm,
And you're welcome to share now in the comments or afterwards, share in
mm,
Home for Restoring Love, so that you can get support and we can hear each other of what
mm.
happened. Um,
And
so,
indirectly or directly, it's like either directly received or learned from what you heard, saw.
absolutely.
Mm,
I didn't get it as much, but I remember my mother saying to my sister, "Are you sure you need that extra roast potato?"
mhm,
And she got really overweight and really uncomfortable. And then she developed bulimia because of it.
mhm,
And I was lucky that I didn't care about what I looked like. I was
mm,
happy to not look. And so I just eat whatever I liked. Um,
mm,
a lot of people, you mentioned this emotional eating, and a lot of people
mm,
in Home for Restoring Love have shared that that's something that they do a lot, and
mhm,
they don't want to do that. So
mm,
how have you resolved that in yourself? How have you
mm,
stopped emotional eating, and what do you do instead so
mm,
that you have a healthy relationship to food?
mm. So I'm going to keep coming back to this point because even though you might not think so, what people typically think about emotional eating is that they eat in response to emotions, which I'm not denying is absolutely there. Um, but it's not just about learning how to, first of all, recognize there's an emotion here, and then how to be able to tolerate the experience of the emotion that's happening in the body at the time, and to just accept that this is a feeling you're having right now, right? Those sort of emotional resilience skills. What people often don't realize is there's an undercurrent of weight control or desire for weight control. And when you're making your decisions about what, when, and how much to eat from your prefrontal cortex rather than from your body, which is a kind of a different system, right? It's just you can feel you just know you want a toasty, or you just know you feel like an apple, rather than I think I should have an apple, or no, a toasty is too high in fat or carbohydrates, so I'm not going to have a toasty, right? It's a different kind of system. When you're making those decisions from your prefrontal cortex, which is what is all around us in the media. Don't eat that. Eat more of this. Eat less of this. If you want to lose weight, count the this, etc., right? We're just bombarded with all of this information. So when you get a strong emotion that's arising, what can happen is your prefrontal cortex goes offline, right? So all the things that you have been mentally restricting, telling yourself you shouldn't be having, when your prefrontal cortex goes offline because here comes a strong emotion, then whatever you've been restricting is suddenly the thing that you want.
Okay.
So there's a kind of double thing going on. Yes, there's the emotional side happening, but there's also a kind of backlash from the restriction happening as well. And so it isn't just about the emotion. It is also about letting go of trying to control our weight and trying to control what we're eating, um, as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And
Mm,
I just was in a group this week,
mm,
a reading that this woman shared. I want to quit looking at my diet because it just feels like my inner rebel is going against me. And I
mhm,
just don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. Would it be worth stopping doing so that I can just eat anything and not think about it. And so that I'm going to actually put the video into her comment thread so that she can
Mhm,
hear and understand, because I know that she's somebody who
mhm,
is into brain science. Um,
mhm,
and I think it would be interesting for her
mhm,
to read that, because it would really help her go, oh, that's what's going on.
mhm.
So how do you do it differently then?
Well, so there are two things that you need to be doing. The one is give yourself permission to eat whatever you want. What I always say to my clients, people in my groups or whatever is, um, you need what our aim is. Okay, so it's a process. It's not like you can just go, oh, make the decision, right? That's what I'm going to do, and I'm already there now. Okay, because there's a lot of things to unravel. There's so many attachments that we have to certain outcomes around our bodies or our food. I mean, particularly living in the place that you and I live in, there's a lot of attachment to eating in a certain way, that makes you a good person or somebody who's worthy, etc. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on
There
in
is.
our general culture anyway. So it is a process, but what we need to do is give ourselves unconditional permission to eat what we want. And when I say unconditional, I mean unconditional, not provided that you're hungry, not provided that you'll stop as soon as you're full, not provided that you don't gain weight, not provided that it's not after 7 p.m. No conditions at all. You need to give yourself unconditional permission, like you're learning how to give yourself unconditional love to eat what you want so that you can get out of your own way and start to calm down the nervous system and allow the body to, in its own time, be able to be heard what your body needs. And yes, your body also sometimes will want chocolate cake. Sometimes people say to me, well, if I really listen to my body, all I'm going to ever want is fruit and vegetables. Like, no, you're going to want to eat chocolate cake or chocolate or whatever it is, some of the time that's fine. So our goal is to give ourselves unconditional permission to eat what we want. And what we're moving towards is a greater sense of attunement to our body signals, but we're whole, right? There's mind, body, emotion, spirit. It's hard to put things into silos, and you just need to trust that whatever comes up as I want this, you trust that and you let yourself have it as calmly as possible, as mindfully as you can muster and manage. And that it also is a process that can take time to be able to kind of feel safe enough in your own skin to be able to be present and eat. It's a process that can take some time. So that's on the one side, giving yourself the unconditional permission to eat what you want. And on the other side, learning how to recognize emotions, learning how to know what these sensations actually mean. And even if you can't name them, that's okay. Just knowing there's a sensation here and maybe it feels uncomfortable, but working within your window of tolerance. So not pushing yourself to really sit through something that feels intolerable. If you can do it for a few seconds or whatever, that's okay. You just keep working at it so that you develop that capacity to be able to experience emotions. But I have to say that with most of the people that I work with, once we get the body more engaged and the decision making coming more from the body and the letting go of all of the messages of what we've internalized about how we should look, how we should eat, and all of that, that whole thing. Emotional eating, pretty much for most people, really calms down without even doing a whole lot of work on emotions. And then there are some people who still need that work. I mean, I do it together, together. So, it's because you're just working different threads. And then, but for most people, it massively calms down. And then that also gives them helps them cultivate that trust within themselves that actually this really is calming down. Okay, and then it feels more manageable to be working on the level of emotion more easily.
That's amazing because I think that often, for me anyway, I tend to, because I'm just so busy, I don't
Mm.
pause and then I just reach to whatever is there, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily always tuning into what my body needs.
Mm-hmm.
It's just quick fixes because I need to fuel myself to carry on
Mm-hmm.
going. So I've really, in the last
Yeah.
few weeks, like made a deliberate choice to look at what
Mm-hmm.
am I eating, and so that I have a so that I'm consciously preparing things that my body needs
Mm-hmm.
rather than just leaving
Yeah.
it to the last minute.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with when I say, the separate, not taking, making these decisions from your conscious cognitive control and rather trying to listen to the body, that doesn't exclude being thoughtful or planning or,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, what we want to do is take care of ourselves in the best way that we can. And of course, planning can help with that. I mean, it's a good idea. I don't grocery shop every 5 minutes based on what I feel like eating in every particular moment. It's not really manageable to do that. And, I might think in the morning, this is what we're going to have for dinner. And by the time dinner comes, maybe I don't particularly feel like that.
Yeah.
And maybe I might change at the last minute if I feel strongly about it. But, it's about, as I say, the middle way, right? Not a sort of black and white deal.
Yeah.
And I know that I think you've shared that you have ADHD. Is that right? And this is also a complexity involved in the relationship with food because there is the impulse control, the attention, all of that sort of stuff, which it just makes it a little bit harder if that is the case. So in your case, planning is super helpful and potentially
And super
setting
impossible.
alarms. Setting alarms for yourself would also be really helpful. So you remind yourself to fuel yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you can just like get lost in whatever you're doing, and then 6 hours go by, and then you're far too hungry, and then it's eat with a bit of frantic, sort of energy around it, which is it's okay, but it doesn't feel that great.
Yeah, I've just been doing Noom, which is so helpful because it just sends a message going, you set when you want your meals. And then it
Mm,
just goes, um, how's your lunch going? Or how's your dinner
mm,
going? And that's really helpful because otherwise I could go a whole day and get
mm,
to 4 in the afternoon and not have eaten anything at
mm,
all.
mm.
There are a couple of people, yeah. Do you want to answer that, or there are a couple of things? Can you
I
see?
just do want to. I can't see actually. Oh, let me just see. I think I have to change to comments. Oh, right, there we go. Um, can I just respond briefly to the
Yeah,
Noom thing? Because,
yeah,
I mean, this isn't we're with your kind of community of people, but
yeah,
I'm sort of coming here with my hat on,
absolutely.
which is, any of these kinds of weight loss apps that is their overall um, purpose is around weight loss. Um, if you have a kind of issue with food, if food is a kind of problematic, you have a problematic relationship with food in your life, I would strongly recommend not going on any of these apps because what they're going to do is keep you in what we call diet mentality, which is this, good and bad, whatever amber colored, green colored, red colored, whatever traffic light system stuff. And that isn't giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. It will be different for different people depending on your own relationship with food. But certainly, anybody that I would be working with who has a difficult relationship with food, I would really be steering away from something that is, again, an outside locus of control rather than what we're wanting to do is cultivate your internal locus of control. So I just thought I had to mention that
No, that's
because I
perfect.
think it's an
And
important
Vanya
thing.
has a program and a membership, and I'd love Vanya you to share about that because you have an amazing program that makes such a difference with helping
Mm.
people revolutionize. So, do you want to share about that for a moment?
Sure. I do have, when I have different ways of working with people, I work one to one with people. I have a 12-week course, which I'm only launching again in September. It's called How to Live a Life of Peace with Food. And in that course, I give really what I think are all the tools and the skills that one needs. I can't say that in 12 weeks you will have mastered everything. It's again a process of unraveling and stuff, but in that 12-week course, I believe is really everything you could need to make peace with food and your body. Well, to make peace with food and to get going on the process of making peace with your body, because that requires some other things potentially, and some other kinds of unraveling. But we make a start with that, and then right now I'm running some master classes. So I just did one a few weeks ago on breaking free from binge eating, and this in where are we now? We're in May. In June, I've got one coming up on emotional eating. Sorry, I paused for a moment because I've just changed the name of it and I've just, blah. But anyway, it's how to free yourself from emotional eating, I think. And then in July, there's one on the power of mindful eating. So got
Great.
those
What's your
three.
website called, Vanya?
It's peacefuleating.co.uk
Okay.
and everything's on there. I also do a weekly Q&A, so people can submit a question. Actually, it's every 2 weeks now. Submit a question anonymously, and then every 2 weeks I spend on Facebook half an hour literally just answering questions. So that's another way I can help people.
I've put a banner there so people can get your
Oh,
website.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So Lucinda said that Lucinda, we might ask your question more in the Restore group so that you can get attention tomorrow, and Vanya will
Hmm.
ask the folk in Restore, and then she can engage with you if you're able to come tomorrow.
That'd be
Um,
great.
but she says, I feel like I won't be loved unless I look a certain way.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's so common for many of
Hmm.
us who've had that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then it alters our sense of what we eat because otherwise we won't be loved if we eat that. And then it distorts our relationship to food.
And if you think about it, you know, we exist in a body. Our whole being is housed in a body. And it's our way of interfacing with the world. And if our body is rejected, it's such a rejection of our whole being, isn't it? Um, it's a very, it's not just about I want to look good kind of thing. It's a very deep and hurtful thing to hold, you know, that sense of being not loved because of how you look. It's deeply, deeply painful, and I will definitely talk more about that tomorrow.
Thanks.
If you, I mean, I'm happy to go on, but also would like
No,
to.
I'm just aware there's a
Yes,
few other comments, and we want
yes,
to also ask the one question of how to stop eating when full was a question.
mhm,
So maybe we can ask that first, how to stop
sure,
eating when full. So
okay.
how do you say you stop eating when you're full?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, as with
how do
everything that I would do, it's going to be, any of these questions is going to be literally, I could write a lot on it. But how to stop eating with you when you're full? I would dial back first and ask you, are you consistently eating when you're hungry? Because if you're not eating when you're hungry consistently, so you go too long, you leave it too long, because people tend to think, oh, being hungry is good because that means I'm losing weight. Or there's a sense of control or virtuousness in being hungry, because people think they're being strong, if they go hungry. Um, so that would be my first question. It's hard to know when you're full if you are overriding hunger. So that would be the very first thing that I would be focusing on, is making sure you don't leave very long gaps between eating. And I would suggest depending, again, it's difficult to do like this because I need to ask questions like, well, how much are you eating? What sort of food are you eating? Because that's going to make a difference in terms of how long should a gap go, between eating. But I would say if you're eating a meal that has a sort of nice mix of protein, carbs, and fat, say, you probably shouldn't go, or you should really be checking in at a maximum 5 hours from that period of time. Um, and maybe even sooner. So I would need to know a lot more to make any kind of recommendation. And I'm not also a dietitian, right? But I've got a lot of experience with this. So, I think I can make some recommendations, but making sure you are not going long periods of time without eating. And then in terms of fullness, I would first just go with that and don't worry about the fullness and let that settle. And then if you still feel that you are eating past fullness, then it might be that you need to slow down a bit so that you can check in with yourself more. A lot of people find it hard to slow down, and it is both a habit, but it can also be because you're not feeling. I call it, I don't know, I don't have other words for it, but I say to my clients sometimes it's like you don't want to eat in front of yourself because you're not giving yourself permission to eat, and so therefore it's hard to slow down, because if you're eating it quickly, then it's like you're almost not doing it. Also, eating without distractions, so not in front of the computer, not in front of your phone, and preferably not in front of the TV. Preferably when you eat, and you're not doing another thing as well as eating, because your brain likes to know that you've eaten. And if your brain is occupied with something else, it's distracting and distorting, your signals. So, I could say other things, but I think I might leave it there for the fullness.
That's really, really helpful. I know that I eat way too fast.
Hmm.
So that's a really good thing for me to slow down. So
Mm.
thanks.
Take
Um,
sips of air, sips of
yeah,
breath.
yeah, yeah. So Lisa said that she was always told she was fat and ugly.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she wasn't fat, she just developed early. So she had a C cup when she was 10,
Mm-hmm.
and they ate unhealthily as a teenager and now has IBS.
Mm.
And they overate. Um, and so at 18, got ill and gained weight. Um, so because it's a StreamYard, Lisa, I can't see the rest of your question. So I'll just go and try and find your question of where you're asking it. Um, but maybe you could talk to that a bit, Vanya, of
Mm.
shifting that relationship, because a lot of people in Home for Restoring Love kept
Mm.
saying, I was fat as a child.
Mm.
And I would
Yeah.
love you to address that because I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people go through that of feeling,
Mm. Mm.
I was judged for being fat, and now I look
Mm-hmm.
back. Some people find that they were fat, or other people find I was never fat, and I can't
Mm-hmm.
believe that I was led to believe that.
Mm-hmm. 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 One of the, I mean, I think it's a crime against humanity. I mean,
Mm,
maybe somebody might think I'm exaggerating. I don't. Is to shame anybody for the body that they're in. And there's, there's a thing called weight stigma, which is really a bias. And, or there's another way of languaging it actually, which I think is stronger and probably better, which is anti-fat bias. And another word is fatphobia, so all of those words are kind of helpful ways to describe this cultural distaste, um, if not hate, and certainly bias against fatness that has really infiltrated our culture, and is deeply, deeply harmful, deeply harmful. It's interfering with children's relationship with their own bodies, or any person's relationship with their own bodies, their relationship with food, their relationship to eating. It is terribly destructive. And here are the facts. body diversity is a thing. Bodies come in different shapes and sizes. Another fact is that across the board, body weight is increasing. So people say, "Oh, but when in the 50s, nobody was fat, everybody was, thin." And A, that's not true, but B, there is some truth in the fact that body size is increasing across the board, across cultures. And guess
Yeah.
what? It's also increasing in animals, and not just domesticated animals or lab rats, but also animals in the wild. So there's a lot of research that's being done on why, but in terms of the way that my interest is in, um, how can we let go of that so that we can help people to feel more at ease and at home in their own skins, to know that they belong no matter what they look like, and to feel like they belong to themselves, because what this does is almost separate ourselves from our own bodies. I've had clients who talk about their body as if it's a separate thing from themselves. It is a thing, right? It's a thing, not their own, that they're walking around in. There's a disembodiment from their own body, and it's just intensely destructive. So I don't think I've answered the question. I'm just kind of speaking to the issue,
That's
but
great.
guide me.
Yeah, that's great. Well, there are two other things that people want to know
Mm,
about. Is one, how do you stop binging? And it's similar, goes along with, can you speak to the addiction to sugar?
mhm,
So they similar sort of things, and I wonder if you can speak to those of how do you
mhm.
stop that binging and addiction to sugar that's, some say is worse than your addiction to cocaine. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mm,
Okay. Oh, juicy, juicy. I love these questions. So with binge eating, I mean, I just did a whole hour and a half's class on it, so I'm just going to give you, sort of headline information about it. On the one hand, we need to, as I said in the beginning, we need to think about the trauma response. So binge eating might be a trauma response, but I'm going to say the same thing as I did with emotional, right at the beginning. I don't know if it was with emotional eating, but right at the beginning, which was for the most part, most people that come to me, um, binge eating is really a reaction to restriction. It's a normal and very healthy response to restriction. Now, when I say restriction, some people say, but I'm not restricting, I'm just binging all the time. And I will say to that, you're mentally restricting. You're telling yourself, tomorrow I won't binge. This is my last binge. Tomorrow I'm going to be good. Tomorrow I'm going to stop with the sugar. Tomorrow I'm going to stop with the carbs, whatever the thing is. I'm tomorrow or the next time or whatever from now on, there's this mental restriction going on. So what that is perceived by your brain as a restriction, and because you have almost certainly dieted before, dieting is interpreted by the brain as a famine. Okay, it doesn't know you want to lose a few pounds so you can fit into your clothes or look so-called better. I use that quotation marks because I don't think you do, but that's what society tells us, etc. Your brain doesn't know that. All it knows is I'm hungry, this doesn't feel right, and it drives you to binge. So the restriction can be a physical restriction, a diet, a fast, anything, where you're actually physically restricting food, or you're over exercising for the amount of food that you're eating, and or it is just the mental restriction, which is still interpreted by your brain as a famine. So this is a major cause for binge eating. And really, when I talk about binge eating, I talk about it on three levels. The one is the biological level, where you need to eat enough food to sustain yourself and not be dieting, and actually not even be trying to lose weight. The second is the psychological level, which I've already spoken to, which is about giving yourself the unconditional permission to eat what you want and to unravel all of the meanings around your weight, around your body, around control, and around food and what you think food will or won't do to you. And then the third level is on the habitual level, because if you repeat a pattern that is giving you a dopamine hit, you will keep repeating the pattern. And so we need to also look at that habitual thing. But for me, it's like a pyramid. So you've got to look at the biological first, make sure you're eating enough and not dieting. And then in terms of the psychological and the habitual, they kind of, can work together with those. Um, but I spend a lot of time on the more psychological side of it. So that's the expedited version of how to stop
That's so
binge
great.
eating.
And you've got a workshop coming up on you've done
I've
is the one
already
you've
done the
done on
binge
binge
eating market.
eating.
Yes, I've already done the
Okay,
binge eating masterclass. People can still purchase it if they want to.
okay,
But I'm now preparing for the emotional eating one.
great.
Mm,
So if you go along to peaceful.eating.co.uk, you'll
mm,
be able to see uh, you'll be able to get the binge eating one, and you can book onto the emotional eating one that's coming up in June.
yeah. So shall I talk about the food addiction question
Yeah, yeah.
quickly? So guess what? So most of you who think you're addicted to food, Zaria just mentioned it, uh, also probably think it's like cocaine, it lights up the reward centers in the brain. And why do we think like this? Because there's been studies on rats that have shown that, they will choose the cocaine rather than the sugar water, right? Is that
They'll choose the sugar
no, no.
water rather than
I
the
mean,
cocaine.
sorry, the other way around. Choose the
Yeah,
sugar water rather than the
yeah.
cocaine. So the first thing I want to say is you're not a rat. Okay, so just remember you're not a rat. And the second thing I want to say is that what isn't spoken about with that particular study is that those rats were food restricted. So you can't, if you're going to really do an experiment like this, you have to give the rats unconditional permission to eat food, as much food as they want, and then see if they're going to choose, what they're going to do. I don't know if they are unrestricted from food. So it's a muddled study, and you're not a rat. So I wouldn't. I don't subscribe to that ideology around food addiction. I rather think of it as food compulsion or sugar compulsion rather than an addiction, because it's not the same as alcohol or narcotics. Um, so there's a behavioral thing going on rather than an actual component of the food that is making it addictive, if that makes sense. So I know there's ongoing research around this, but I can tell you that for myself, I thought I was a food addict. I thought, one bite and I eat the whole packet, and I behaved like that until I stopped trying to control my weight and I stopped trying to, restrict how much sugar I ate. And I relaxed into the eating process and enjoyed what I was eating, let go of shame and guilt and all of those kinds of feelings around eating the food. And I can have literally anything in my house, and so do my clients, through a process, of course, where you're not behaving in that compulsive way around the sugar. So, um, yeah, I don't believe in the idea of sugar addiction or food. I mean, in a way, we're all addicted to food because we have to eat, right? So,
Yeah.
of course, the reward centers light up in your brain, but just like they do with hugging or sex or having a great conversation or laughing or all of those other things that help us to survive.
That's so great. So
Mm,
refreshing to hear you're completely, everything you finding your own way of what
mm,
honors you, and helping other people to
mm.
revolutionize their relationship to themselves. I'm so grateful
Yeah.
that you've come and answered the questions that we have, and I see there are a few
Mm.
more, but I know that we've said,
Yes.
those are the core ones that I wanted to answer.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to you, Vanya, for taking your
Oh,
time
you're
out and
welcome.
coming to chat to everybody.
It's been really
Everybody, pop
fun.
along to peacefuleating.co.uk, and you can find Vanya on Facebook. She's also on
Mm.
Peaceful Eating on Facebook, and
Instagram,
she,
Peaceful Eating UK on Instagram. I'm not the greatest social media person. I just have to say it's not my favorite place to be, but I have got a blog with hundreds of blogs. You can literally just feast on lots of information if you're interested.
great. And, she goes live every week on her Facebook page
Every
too,
two
so
weeks.
you can ask questions every 2 weeks. So you can go and
Mm.
ask questions that you have around
Yep.
that. So really appreciate you, Vanya.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thank you for being here, all of you who are here.
Yeah,
It's
Lisa
been
says
really
she'd
good to
like to
see you.
thank you for doing this. It's already brought insight to her. So
Oh,
thanks so much.
great. That's wonderful.
And thanks for your comments, Samantha and Anna. Um, all right, everybody. We're sending you so much love, Vanya. And
Thank
thanks so
you, and
much.
you too.
Love to you all.
Yeah, lots of
Bye.
love. Bye.